A $500 bottle of Creed and a $300 bottle of Creed are sitting on the same shelf right now, made by the same house, wearing the same royal mythology. And one of them is genuinely one of the finest masculine fragrances ever produced, while the other has been described by serious collectors as bleach and salt water with a lemon problem. Same name on the label. Same century-old story printed on the box. Completely different truth inside the bottle. That is the mistake almost everyone makes when they judge fragrance by brand instead of by bottle. And today we are fixing it, one fragrance at a time. Worst first. Number 7. Dior Sauvage, Eau de Toilette. Sauvage is the best-selling masculine fragrance on earth, and that popularity is exactly the problem. Bergamot and Sichuan pepper up top, a synthetic ambroxan base doing almost all of the structural work underneath. It is not badly made in any technical sense. It is just so completely everywhere that the fragrance community itself, the people who actually study this stuff for a hobby rather than a habit, routinely scores it lower in blind community rankings than the general buying public does, because ubiquity carries a cost nobody prices into the bottle. When a scent stops being a signature and becomes wallpaper in every office, every gym, every airport lounge in America, the $110 you paid bought you anonymity, not identity. François Demachy formulated it around a molecule so common in modern masculine perfumery that half the fragrances released after 2015 share its structural DNA, which means the thing Sauvage is actually selling you, at this point, is not distinctiveness. It is belonging to the largest group of men in the country who all smell approximately the same, walking into the same rooms wearing the exact same signal. All the fragrances mentioned in this video are linked below with the best current prices anyone could find, so keep that in mind as we go. Which, by the way, means the men actually paying attention to what a fragrance says about them have started moving away from Sauvage entirely, not because the formula got worse, but because everyone finally noticed how many people were standing next to them wearing it. That migration is worth remembering because it repeats itself through every single fragrance on this list, in both directions. Once enough people can smell the gap between the story and the substance, the story stops working, no matter how much money gets spent defending it. And once enough people notice a formula that actually delivers, no amount of quiet marketing can keep that fragrance obscure forever either. This next one costs the same as Sauvage but sells on a completely different weakness. Not overexposure, but a formula that never had much substance to begin with. Number 6. Paco Rabanne. 1 million, Eau de Toilette. The gold bar bottle told you everything about the priorities here before you even smelled the liquid inside it. Leather, cinnamon, and a sweetness that reads more like candy than perfumery, projected loud enough to announce itself before you have even entered the room. It sells because it is aggressive and instantly recognizable, and that same aggression is exactly what makes it feel disposable at $110 a bottle. This is a fragrance built entirely around first impression. Engineered specifically for the first 90 seconds, someone stands near you, with nothing structural underneath it built to reward a second one. Ask anyone who has worn it past their 20s what they remember about the dry down, and most of them cannot answer, because there barely is one worth remembering. The gold bar was never really about the fragrance. It was about looking expensive in a photograph and smelling loud enough to be noticed across a crowded club, and that priority shows up in exactly the place you would expect. Everywhere except the actual formula, where the effort quietly stops the moment the top notes finish making their point. The next name on this list built its entire reputation on being different, and then quietly, over the course of roughly 15 years of small reformulation decisions nobody announced, stopped being different at all. Number 5. Jean-Paul Gaultier Le Male. Le Male used to mean something specific. Lavender, vanilla, and mint, in a proportion nobody else in mainstream perfumery had tried at that scale when it launched. The current formulation has been diluted through so many reformulation passes since then that fragrance forums now describe it as smelling like a half-dozen other mainstream masculines stacked together. Armani Code, Prada, half the Sephora counter, with nothing left that clearly identifies it as uniquely Le Male anymore. That is what happens when a fragrance gets reformulated repeatedly to hit a cost target instead of a creative one. Each individual change looks small on paper, a slightly cheaper synthetic swapped in here, a fraction of a % less of an expensive material there. Stacked across a decade and a half of those small decisions, they add up to a completely different fragrance quietly wearing the same striped sailor bottle and the same price tag it launched with. A fragrance that used to be a genuine signature has become a category average, and Jean-Paul Gaultier still charges signature prices for it, betting correctly that most buyers will never notice the gap between the bottle they remember and the one currently on the shelf. The next entry costs more than double what Le Mail does, and somehow does even less with the money. Number 4. Tom Ford Ombre Leather. Tom Ford built an entire pricing tier on the idea that the private blend line delivers a level of complexity you cannot get anywhere else at any price. A promise that justifies charging more than double what most designer fragrances cost for a comparable bottle size. Ombre Leather is the fragrance that undercuts that promise from inside the brand's own catalog. It opens as leather and stays leather for hours, without meaningfully developing into anything else across the wear. Reviewers who own it describe the experience as wearing a leather sofa rather than a fragrance with an actual structure, a scent with a beginning, and no middle or end to speak of. At $250, a fragrance that refuses to evolve is not restraint or minimalism, the words the marketing wants you reaching for. It is a formula that ran out of ideas after the top note and never bothered writing the rest of the composition, betting that a heavy enough leather accord and a private blend label would be enough to make nobody ask what happened to the other 7 hours of wear time they were promised on the box. If Ombre Leather fails by doing too little, the next one fails by doing far too much, at a price that makes the failure even harder to forgive. Number 3. Kilian Angel's Share. This is a $250 fragrance built by Givaudan, the same industrial fragrance conglomerate quietly formulating a huge share of the designer counter under other brand names. And it leans so hard into cognac and cinnamon sweetness that a meaningful share of the people who actually try it in person describe it as nauseating rather than seductive. That is not a niche taste disagreement you can wave away as personal preference. That is a formula miscalibrated in the exact direction niche perfumery is supposed to avoid, mistaking raw intensity for sophistication and betting that a high enough price tag will stop anyone from questioning the difference. Kilian markets the entire brand around indulgence and decadence, using language borrowed straight from the world of fine spirits, which works right up until the sweetness stops reading as luxurious and starts reading as cloying. And for Angel's Share, enough wearers hit that line early in the wear that the fragrance spends its entire lifespan a few degrees past where it needed to stop. The next one on this list is not a bad fragrance in the way the others are. It is something almost worse, a genuinely well-made fragrance that punishes you for wearing it. Number 2. Amouage Interlude Man. Interlude is genuinely well-constructed, dense with incense, oud, and spice, in a way few mainstream houses would even attempt. Built by perfumers who clearly know what they are doing at a technical level, few designer brands can match on their best day. The problem is that Amouage built a fragrance so strong it functions almost as a public hazard, described repeatedly by the people who actually own it as something you wear at home and never in an enclosed space with other human beings nearby, an elevator scent that clears the elevator before the doors even close. A $300 bottle that actively punishes you for wearing it around people is not a luxury experience. It is a warning label with a designer price tag attached to it, and no amount of craftsmanship changes that math for the man who actually has to leave the house and sit next to another human being at some point during an ordinary day. Which brings us to the fragrance that should embarrass an entire pricing structure built on nothing but a story. Number 1. Creed Millésime Impérial. Here is the fragrance that should embarrass Creed's entire pricing structure more than any other bottle in the catalog. $350 for a composition that experienced collectors on base notes have described, without much argument from anyone in the replies, as lemon, bleach, and salt water, an aquatic accord so thin it barely survives past the first hour on skin before collapsing into something forgettable. There is real ambergris and real craftsmanship inside Creed's catalog, genuinely rare materials used in genuinely serious proportions elsewhere on the shelf. This is not where any of it lives. Millésime Impérial survives entirely on the Creed name, the royal warrant mythology built around King Alfonso XIII and a supposed unbroken family bloodline stretching back over 2.5 centuries, and a bottle shape expensive enough to photograph well for a fragrance that does not remotely justify what it costs once the story is stripped away and you are left with just the liquid. Keep that name in your head, because it comes back later in this video, and when it does, the entire story flips completely. Now here is what a fragrance actually looks like when the formula, not the story wrapped around it, is doing the work. Same industry, same price brackets in some cases. Completely different relationship between what you pay and what you actually get. Notice something about the 7 fragrances you just heard. Not one of them failed because the house behind it lacked resources, talent, or expertise. Dior, Tom Ford, Amouage, Creed, these are not amateur operations run by people who do not understand perfumery, and none of them are short on the money required to formulate something exceptional if that had actually been the goal. They failed for the same underlying reason in 7 different disguises. Somewhere in the process, the commercial brief took priority over the creative one, and the formula got built to hit a cost target, a marketing angle, or a shelf presence instead of being built to actually earn the price on the box. That distinction, between a fragrance built to sell a story and a fragrance built to be worn, is the entire difference between the two halves of this list, and it has nothing to do with how famous or how old the house making it happens to be.